Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Tonight we have a late night insight video on a fragrance that I have been sitting on for 2 years, over 2 years actually. This was given to me by my good friend Anuj at Enchanté Perfumes, and it is called Dunhill's Edition. Now this is a 5 ml, and before we go any further, I have a rant because I've been doing this video for all of 23 seconds and I have not ranted about anything yet. So this is what they used to give consumers in the old days. A miniature 5 ml, and it was shaped in the shape of the bottle. It was literally a mini. I do love a good mini, I'm not gonna lie, because for someone with a big collection like me, 5 mls is perfect for me to get to know the scent. And you can see I decanted it because I like to spray, and I've used all but maybe a ml or two. So I've probably ran through 3 mls of this 5 ml. And so over the years, I've been wearing it to bed and getting to know it and stuff like that. And probably on first spray, I knew this was not full bottle worthy for me because this is a very, I don't want to say generic, but it's a very simplistic, easy, it's an easy to wear fragrance from the 1980s, but it still retains that 80s character, if that makes sense. So I still like it. If you gave me a bottle, I would wear it. But I think when resources are limited and you have to kind of decide on how to split up your resources, this is one that I would probably take a pass on. And I have took a pass on. I have not purchased a bottle of this yet. But it is now officially discontinued, which is a recent development. It just got, it's not removed from the Dunhill website, but it's sold out. It's been sold out on the Dunhill website for a long time. So let me read sort of the way Dunhill describes Edition. And then we'll talk a little bit about how it breaks down. And remember, I have not gone through a full bottle or anything. This is just almost like an early impression video because I only have a little mini, but I must make the distinction. This is the vintage. So while I do think Inter Parfums is a good distributor, I don't know the state of the current version of Edition. They say some things in here which I disagree with, or which if I was making my breakdown, I would not have put those notes in what I'm smelling in the vintage. So I don't know whether it's just kind of, whether it has officially been reformulated and the notes are different in the modern version of Edition or what, but just something to consider, okay? So here's what they say. They say, Edition epitomizes masculine refinement with fresh top notes of bergamot and lemon, giving way to a warming heart of coriander, basil, and nutmeg. The base is an earthy blend of sandalwood, vetiver, amber, and musk. See, I don't get very much amber or musk from this, I must admit. Enticing yet understated, distinctively British yet with an international sensibility. The frosted glass bottle, yes, frosted glass bottle, references our motoring heritage with a subtle relief pattern inspired by car engine components. So Dunhill was a brand that basically hit the scene in 1893, if memory serves, and they started to do things like leather products and leather goods, and when the automobile became a thing, you know, and really took off with Henry Ford's Model T and all that good stuff, and the car revolution, if you want to call it that, they began working with the British car manufacturers, doing things like the inside leather goods for the cars and stuff like that. And so that was one way they got their break, and they do a lot of different things from suits to the leather goods, like I talked about, to fragrances, okay? And so for me, if you think about the 1980s and you think about kind of my favorite fragrances from the 80s, the big animalic bombs, the Furios, the Koroses, the Antaises, the Joint by, here I was going to reach down and grab it and I can't find it. Joint by Roccobarocco. Wait, this is a 90s fragrance, but it smells like an 80s fragrance. But if you think about kind of those type of fragrances from the early days of the 80s, from the early 80s, and then in the end of the 80s, it kind of went into a shift in pattern. It wasn't about the big animalics and the big hair and all that stuff. It turned into something completely different. And Dunhill, if you want my personal opinion on Dunhill Edition kind of sits at the crossroads. It's like right at that point where Dunhill, I think, as a brand knew times were a-changing. They were like, okay, the wind is shifting. We need to get out in front of this, guys. So we want to make a fresh fragrance. We don't want Koros. We don't want Antaeus. We don't want a big animalic bomb. We don't want the big hairspray. We don't want any of that. We want to be modern. And so for a man in 2024 smelling this, they may smell this and think, this is very vintage smelling. But I think in 1984, this was very futuristic smelling because it used a very modern freshness to me. That a man today, I think, could easily, let's say you're not big into perfume like we are, okay? I think somebody who was not big into perfume would go for this over the Koroses or the Antaises originally. I think this is more of an easy, a dumb reach, if you want to call it that, an easy wear, especially in the warmer weather, because I don't think it has the ambers or the musks or all that stuff that their website says it has. So there is this modern freshness that came to dominate the 80s, and you started to see things like, for example, New West by Aramis was a big hit. This was a huge hitter. You started to see things like Cool Water, and those type of fragrances, Green Irish Tweed, right, by Creed. 1 year after this. And so those type of fresher fragrances started to dominate the scene. And I think in 1984, Dunhill saw where it was going and they tried to get out in front of it, but they didn't know where it was going to land. It's like trying to guess where on the green the golf ball is going to land, right? Especially with the Masters being today. There's a little analogy for you. So they're trying to guess exactly where on the green the ball is going to land. And they took their shot. I mean, they said, you know what? We don't know exactly what type of freshness is going to be, but we know that it's shifting to fresh. So let's put out a fragrance that borrows some things from the 70s and early 80s. So for example, I think Dunhill Edition borrows from Z-14. I think it borrows from Cacharel Pour L'Homme. I think you put these two spicy fragrances together with kind of the cinnamon feel, the nut from here, the nutmeg feel from here. And, you know, I think a Italian take on Dunhill Edition, if you really want to get into the weeds, would be something like Borsalino. Borsalino is kind of an Italian take on Dunhill Edition for me. And then if you think about kind of the lavender in Dunhill Edition, I think Adidas from 1985, which people see the Adidas name and they laugh. This is no laughing matter. This is an amazing, maybe one of the best lavenders in my collection. It is fantastic. For a fragrance from 1985 or 86, whenever this came out, the lavender in here, the smoothness of the lavender really feels like Edition may have inspired this a little bit. So Edition for me, it kind of sits in a strange place. It's kind of at a crossroads is really the way that I like to think about it. And because, like I said, they didn't know where the freshness was going to go. So they didn't know aquatics were going to be such a big hit. So what they decided to do is they decided to create this fresh fragrance, but in a different way. So I think they gave the perfumer, whose name is Alain Astori, who has not created much, I can say, that really interests me. He did a fragrance for Guy Laroche called Horizon from 1993, which is a very interesting take on that aquatic fresher type fragrance. I'll review it. I have some vintage bottles of Horizon in my collection, so one day I'll review it when it's really hot here in Texas. That'll be a perfect summer type review. But I think what Dunhill did is they said, okay, let's make this freshness, but we don't know exactly where the market's going to go, so let's just create our own style of freshness. So Alain decided to use floral notes in the heart, and he used them in a way where they don't smell floral. So when you smell it, I think if you're like a big-time frag head, you could probably pick out that there is a floral heart in here. I think maybe the spicy carnation works with the spices in this fragrance. I forgot to mention, even though this is listed as a fougere, I've heard some people call this an aromatic fougere. I wouldn't put this in the aromatic fougere category of, you know, this is completely different from something like Gucci Nobile, for example. This is an aromatic fougere to me. This is not really an aromatic fougere, even though it's a fougere. It's almost like Dunhill trying to do a modern neo fougere thing, but in 1984. So the thing that I really have to stress about this, if you really want to try to wrap your head around what Dunhill Edition smells like and you've never smelled it before, is it smells spicy. The spices are the star of the show here. Even though there's lavender, geranium, and tonka bean, the three main elements of a fougere, Alain Astori basically used this floral heart in a way to add freshness. So when you smell it, you can, like I said, you can maybe pick out the spicy carnation, which is slightly green, and you can maybe pick out the fresh bits of cyclamen, and the geranium comes across very fresh here. So sometimes geranium can come across as spicy or rosy. Here it feels very, very fresh. And so they use the floral heart in a way to act as a freshener to the spices, is the way that the fragrance wears on me. It doesn't wear like a proper fougere, but it's too early to be an amber fougere. So it's not in the category of something like Zino, which came out a couple years after Edition, or Heritage, right, by Guerlain. It's not in this category yet. I prefer these, actually, to Edition. But Edition falls in that weird crossroad. So you have to understand the spices dominate. Even though there's citruses in the top, the spices dominate for me. And so you get a lot of nutmeg, which is woody, warming, spicy. And you basically get this mace note, which mace is supposed to give off this sort of it's almost like a nuttier smelling nutmeg, if that makes sense. So nutmeg is warm, woody, spicy, but there's a bitterness to the spices in here is what's interesting. And if you watch the there's like an advertisement for Edition you can find. I'm sure if you search it on YouTube, I'm sure you'll see it. It's like a bunch of guys like fencing, because they probably figured, hey, what's a good masculine sport? Fencing. So two guys fencing, you know, they put the fencing mask on, they go at it, and then when they're done, of course, they take the mask off and they shake hands like a proper British gentleman. Chip, chip, cheerio, let's go for a cup of tea kind of thing. And so, but that's the vibe that they were kind of going for, is what it feels like. Something masculine, but classy. And something maybe slightly risky, slightly daring with the fencing, because of course there's sharp swords involved, but, also, at the end of the day, you shake hands like a proper gentleman, go play some golf, and have a good cup of tea, right? There's a little bit of that undertone in there. But what I appreciate about this is there's the bitterness of the mace/nutmeg. I was actually, there's a very interesting kind of bit on nutmeg on Bon Parfumeur website that I found. They talk about how long it takes for nutmeg to be distilled into proper essential oil. The nutmeg has to be dried for weeks until the hard shell can be broken and the nutmeg inside, and you know, that spicy woody smell of nutmeg that most people know from your spice cabinet, right? But it's a very sort of I would say it's a essential oil that has a lot of layers to it. Nutmeg is not just a simple smell. I think there is a lot of layers to it. I've often said nutmeg kind of works as a referee in the fragrance sport, if you will. It keeps all the other kind of notes in the ring. It feels like it wrangles them up. You know, it keeps them from going out of bounds. And nutmeg does exactly that. This is a great example of nutmeg used in perfumery. And I'm torn on nutmeg. I like nutmeg, but when it's the highlighted note, when it's kind of like the spotlighted note, sometimes it's a little bit boring. Now, there are some rumors that the vintage bottles have real ambergris in them, and I could potentially see that because, you know, it feels like maybe there's something highlighting or spotlighting some of these other notes. But I don't know if that's true or not. I have no idea. But I like how the fragrance incorporates these spicy, bitter elements, but also there's tonka in here. So there's a little bit of sweetness along with the bitterness, and it kind of has this weird combination between nutty, bitter, and this sweet undertone, if you will. And you know, the nutmeg or the mace can come across as smelling like a nuttier, bitter version of nutmeg, if you will. But it kind of feels like it's trying to walk that line between bitter and sweet. But it never goes bubblegum, modern bubblegum. It never goes cupcake. You know, it's not done in a modern sweet way. The sweetness is done elegantly within that gentleman upstanding fougere category, right? You're going to put your fencing suit on, you're going to take your fencing suit off. Are you going to get into an outfit with shorts? Hell no. You're going to get into a three-piece suit with your pocket watch, and you're going to go have your cup of tea. There is that gentlemanly aspect about this fragrance. You cannot get away from it. So, like I said, masculine, very classy type vibe, and I don't think there's the amber musk combination in here. At least not in... So I've got maybe like a 2 or 3 hour dry down here. Not in the vintage. It doesn't feel like there is a musk, like the Dunhill website highlights musk and amber, and I just don't see it. I can see the Tonka because it's a proper fougere, but because it's missing that musk and amber profile, I would be curious to see if maybe the new bottle has added that or what, or maybe they're just saying some people get an amber like accord. I don't get that from Dunhill Edition. To me, in fact, one of the things about Dunhill is how just with those notes being left out, you can really almost smell the simplicity in this fragrance. It's like there's a hole missing where you would normally put the amber and the musks and all that. It's like it's missing. And so it doesn't necessarily feel flat, but it feels purposely simple, you know, when you wear this scent. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think this type of scent would be perfect for someone who lives in a warm climate like me in Texas, but you don't want to wear the New Wests, or you don't want to wear the aquatics or the normal summer type fragrances. You want something that is a throwback to the 80s, but you won't wear your Koroses and stuff like that in the heat, even though I will. Maybe you won't. You want something that is more seasonal specific. This is where Dunhill Edition, I think, can really shine, because it definitely gives that vintage masculine, classic masculine type vibe. But it does it in kind of an easy to wear and fresh, without incorporating any of those bubblegum, modern, cupcake, disgusting, sweet, amberwood type smells. It doesn't have any of that in there. And so for the fresh aspect, you know, the missing elements of the ambers, the labdanums, there's no resins, there's no myrrh, there's no Peru balsams or anything like that. It's a beautifully gentle fragrance. That's a good word for this fragrance. This fragrance is gentle. It's calming, it's gentle, and, you know, it's for a man that wants to stay classy. I heard a lot of people talk about this fragrance as being an old man scent, and I completely disagree. I don't think it's an old man scent at all. I think this would go amazing on a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old, but they had to know how to carry it, and they have to know what this fragrance stands for. I don't think that a 25-year-old that is out at the bar trying to bag chicks is going to like this, okay? Now, a 25-year-old that's maybe staying in, listening to Puccini, and reading a book or something may really dig this. Someone that's maybe a little bit more elegant, more well-read, those are the kind of people that I would see, where I don't necessarily think that you have to be old to wear this, but maybe you have to have some, internal years under your belt, if you will. You have to have the experience. You have to have the knowledge, and you have to know how to carry it, for me. And like I said, the spices are the main thing in this scent. So even though it's a fougere, the nutmeg and the mace, if you will, I think the spices are number one. If you kind of ranked the ingredients by the main accords and what I smell, spices would be number one. But that doesn't discount the citruses. I have to admit, the smooth lavender, this is not a coarse lavender. I described the lavender in fragrances I've reviewed recently as like a stormy lavender. This is not any of that. This is not a lavender that kind of gives you the feeling of like thunderstorms and scratchy lavender. It's not that. This is a very smooth lavender. That's why I said I think Adidas from 85 took cues from Edition. The lavender here is very, very smooth and very elegant. And, you know, the lemon and bergamot, they listed lemon and bergamot as being fresh top notes. And I'll agree with that. You definitely get a little bit of kind of bracing, fresh citruses with the very smooth lavender. And instantly you get, along with that though, you get the spices and you get that fresh accord from the heart notes. And I think it's that heart floral, the floral heart, which Alain Astori created, that really gives that freshness. But in a way, like I said, it felt like they were kind of trying to guess the future and didn't exactly guess it right, but they still did well enough to have a fragrance that was on the market for 30 years or whatever the hell this was. This just got discontinued. It was not very long ago. This has been on the market for a long time, so obviously it was good enough. It's not my favorite Dunhill. I would actually rank the original Dunhill for men from 1934 ahead of Edition, and I would rank Blend 30 ahead of both of those. This is one of my favorite fragrances of all time, and definitely my favorite Dunhill. And so, like I said, it's a good fragrance. I must also mention that as it continues to dry, I detect more and more of the vetiver. So you kind of get this earthy, prominent vetiver note that is green. And I think there's a fir note in here, like a balsam fir in here as well. So you get kind of the greenness from the fir. You get green from the vetiver, but you also get a little bit of earthiness into the dry down. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was an oak moss note, especially in the vintage, like a real proper oak moss, because that would be kind of a third green type note. And you do get that green, those green touches. So even though I made this feel like a simple fragrance, and it is a simple fragrance, it wears like a simple fragrance, I think they did that on purpose. They wanted to portray this kind of vintage, classical, even though they were trying to be very futuristic about it with the freshness, there's still lots of very classical touches in here, but they wanted it to wear simple. But even though it wears simple, I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't dismiss this as not being detailed, because if you're a fragrance enthusiast, you can kind of pick up some of those details. I mentioned some of the green touches, the tonka gives off little nutty touches here and there. The vetiver is actually almost a green, grassy, nutty vetiver as well. And, you know, in the air, it comes off as simplistic. It does. I'm not going to lie. It comes off as a simple, spicy, traditionally masculine fragrance with some freshness in today's time when you smell this. But if you really get into the details, you can pick out the details in here. But I really think this is for somebody who, like in my mind, this is for someone who smells those animalic fragrances. They smell the Coroses. They smell the Joint by Roccobarocco. They smell these type of animalic fragrances, and they're like, who in the world would want to smell that? I want to smell classical. I want to smell like, I think this fragrance inspired fragrances from the future as well. So for example, Kenzo Jungle Pour Homme, which is also sadly discontinued. I'm telling you, all these spicy fragrances seem to be just getting the axe. Like, they're just not selling very well. And so this got discontinued. Cacharel Pour Homme. This came out in the 90s, an Olivier Cresp creation. This got the axe. This is discontinued. But I think this was inspired by Dunhill Edition. And maybe even Clive Christian's X. You could draw a direct line. Clive Christian's X to this, to something like I said, Halston Z-14 in the 70s, all the way to the 2000s. And so I think this has also inspired other fragrances. And so you get that green, grassy, earthy vetiver. Oh, and also this very natural smelling cedarwood. It really is a straight up and down, fundamental, easy to wear. Like I said, spicy, woody, but without those huge animalics that the 80s were known for, if that makes sense. And like I said, even though it's simple, it's efficient and it does the job. And the details are there. And if you made me guess some notes that are not listed, I would probably guess maybe there's a little bit of a tobacco vibe. Sometimes tonka, since it's so often used to sweeten tobacco, sometimes when you get a good tonka note, and this is a good tonka note in here, sometimes when you get a good tonka note, your brain will like smell the tobacco, even though it's not there. But there is a little bit of a hay-like tobacco feeling in here. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there's like a hay note or something in here that's just not listed. So hay, tobacco, and maybe the last thing would be pepper. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there was a little bit of like a black pepper note in the top, along with the mace / nutmeg, whatever you want to call it. Parfumo says mace. Dunhill's website says nutmeg. I wouldn't be surprised if there was both. Or I wouldn't be surprised if mace was in the vintage, nutmeg's in the modern. I think mace may be even a more expensive ingredient than nutmeg, because it's harder to it's harder to distill. Mace is like the dried aril, or like this lacy covering of the nutmeg fruit. It's like a lacy outer covering, if you will. And it's got that warm, nuttier version of nutmeg, if you will. So that is basically the fragrance, the focus on the spices, a proper fougere, if you will, very classy, simple, but still detail oriented. Enough that I enjoyed my 5 ml decant. I've been sitting on this for a long time. The vintage haul from a couple days ago made me want to focus on a couple vintage fragrances. So today was Elvis and Dunhill Edition. And I think this might be the first Dunhill I've reviewed on the channel, which if that's true, that is absolutely insane. It just goes to show how many fragrances there are. 2.5 years in, and it's the first Dunhill. So still, we've got Dunhill for Men from 1934 and Dunhill Blend 30 from 1978 on the docket. This one is an absolute, this is going to be a Vintage Hall of Fame review. This will probably be a discontinued gem. This is also discontinued, by the way. I forgot to mention, Dunhill for Men is also discontinued. So very, very sad times for vintage lovers. Seems like stuff is just getting chopped left and right. But if you have experience with Dunhill Edition, I would love to hear your thoughts as always. Thank you to Anuj for including this in an order I did years and years ago. It allowed me to do the video today, so I very much appreciate it, my friend. As always, leave a comment. Love seeing your faces down below. Thanks for watching as always. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.